I never thought my friend's mom would look at me that way, but when she whispered, "Don't tell him, you're my favorite secret," my world changed. I still remember the first time I stepped into my friend's house that summer. The air inside was cool, filled with the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. Sunlight spilled through the wide kitchen windows, warming the tiled floor in golden patches. It felt like the kind of home that belonged in a picture frame, comfortable, alive, and quietly beautiful. And then I saw her. My friend's mom. She turned from the counter when she heard us come in, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. She was nothing like the women I was used to meeting. There was something about the way she carried herself, graceful, effortless, like she had lived enough to know exactly who she was. She wore a soft, fitted blouse and jeans that looked casual, but the way she moved in them made her presence impossible to ignore. Her long dark hair caught the sunlight, glowing with warmth. But it wasn't her clothes, or her hair, or even her striking features that stopped me in my tracks. It was her smile. The kind of smile that wasn't just polite, but personal, like she had noticed me, really noticed me. For a moment too long, her eyes held mine. They were dark, calm, but with a flicker of playfulness behind them. I couldn't tell if I imagined it, but it felt as if she was studying me the way I was studying her. "Welcome," she said warmly, her voice steady but smooth in a way that seemed to settle in my chest. "It's nice to finally meet you. I've heard a lot." I forced a smile back, trying to play it cool, but my throat was dry. "Good things, I hope?" I managed to reply, my voice sounding lighter than I felt. She laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. That tiny gesture, so casual, so natural, sent a strange ripple through me. "The best things," she said. Her son rolled his eyes, muttering something about her being too nice, and walked ahead toward his room. But I stayed behind a beat longer, caught in the warmth of her presence. She noticed. I could tell she noticed. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Juice?" she asked, turning back to the counter. The way she moved, unhurried, sure of herself, was mesmerizing. I stepped forward to help, offering to carry a tray she was putting together. Our hands brushed for the briefest moment as I took it from her, and I felt a spark, sharp and undeniable. It was nothing. Just a touch. But I couldn't ignore how aware I became of it. "Thank you," she said, her eyes lingering just a second too long before turning away. And that was it. Just an introduction. A smile. A simple brush of hands. But as I followed my friend down the hall, I realized I was still carrying that smile with me, replaying the softness of her voice, the quiet intensity of her eyes. I told myself it was nothing, just admiration, maybe curiosity. But deep down, I already knew. Something had shifted. Something I wouldn't be able to forget. The days that followed felt ordinary on the surface, but looking back, I can see how every little detail began to stitch something invisible between us. It wasn't dramatic or obvious, nothing anyone else would notice. It was in the quiet moments, the simple gestures, the ways her attention lingered on me just a little longer than necessary. One afternoon, I was standing in the living room waiting for my friend to grab something upstairs. The sunlight was pouring through the curtains, dust floating lazily in the air, when she walked in carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. Without thinking, I rushed forward to help. "Careful, those are heavier than they look," she said, her voice carrying that light humor I was already beginning to associate with her. I reached for the bag, and in that instant, our hands met on the handle. Warm skin against mine, her fingers soft but strong. Neither of us moved immediately, and for a fraction of a second, it felt like the entire house grew still. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, something floral and subtle, mixed with the everyday scent of laundry and home. She gave a small smile, one corner of her mouth lifting. "You're stronger than you look," she teased, finally letting go. I laughed nervously, setting the bag down on the counter, but inside I was fighting the urge to ask myself why her touch had left my chest tight. Moments like that kept happening. Sometimes I'd find myself in the kitchen, and she'd ask me to reach something from the higher shelf. My friend wasn't around, so it was just us, moving around each other in this small space, close enough to feel the warmth of her body, close enough that I'd catch the soft brush of her sleeve against mine. She always thanked me with that same smile, her eyes sparkling in a way that felt private. One evening, she offered me a glass of water, and when I reached for it, our fingers grazed again. It was nothing, absolutely nothing. But the pause that followed, the way her eyes lifted to meet mine before she quickly looked away, told me she felt it too. It wasn't only the touches. It was the way she asked about me, genuinely curious. She wanted to know about my studies, my plans, what I wanted for myself. She listened in a way few people did, leaning against the counter, her arms folded lightly but her eyes focused completely on me. "You're thoughtful," she said once, almost under her breath. It was the kind of compliment that sounded casual, but the softness in her tone made my heart race. There were no grand declarations, no obvious lines crossed. Just small pieces, shared glances, brushes of touch, the kind of silences that felt full instead of empty. And the more these moments collected, the harder it became to ignore the truth, we were both aware. Neither of us would say it out loud, not yet. But it was there, building slowly, quietly, like the air just before a summer storm, charged, waiting, inevitable. It happened one evening when the house was quieter than usual. My friend had gone out with others, leaving me behind, waiting for him to return. I thought I'd be alone in the living room, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, but then I heard her footsteps. She entered softly, carrying a glass of wine in one hand, the lamplight catching the deep red liquid. She wasn't dressed up, just a simple sweater and jeans, but there was something about the ease with which she moved that made her presence feel heavier, more deliberate. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, tilting her head with that same gentle smile. "Of course not," I said quickly, sliding over a little on the sofa even though there was plenty of space. She settled beside me, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. The only light in the room came from a single lamp in the corner, casting a soft, golden glow. Outside, the crickets hummed, and the whole house seemed wrapped in stillness. For a while, we spoke casually. About the weather, about my studies, about little things that didn't mean much. But then, her voice shifted, quieter, lower, as if she wasn't talking to me so much as letting her own thoughts escape. "You know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "sometimes I feel invisible in this house." I turned to her, surprised by the honesty in her tone. She wasn't complaining, she was confessing. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. She gave a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. "It's not anyone's fault, really. Life just moves fast. Kids grow up, routines settle in. People stop looking at you the way they used to." Her words hung in the air. I didn't know what to say, but I knew I had to say something. I don't think anyone could ever overlook you, I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes flicked to mine then, sharp and searching, as though testing whether I meant it. And when she saw that I did, her expression softened. Thank you, she whispered, her voice almost too quiet to hear. She set her glass down on the coffee table, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, the silence between us felt different, not empty, not awkward, but weighted with something unspoken. She leaned back slightly, her shoulder brushing against mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was beating too loudly, filling the silence. I probably shouldn't be saying these things to you, she murmured, almost to herself. Maybe you needed to, I replied, my own voice hushed. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes carried something deeper, gratitude, vulnerability, a fragile honesty I hadn't seen from her before. We didn't move closer. We didn't cross any obvious line. But in that dimly lit living room, with her voice still lingering in my ears, I knew something had shifted between us again. It wasn't just glances or touches anymore. It was trust. And trust, I realized, was far more dangerous. The next time I saw her, everything between us felt different. It wasn't obvious, no one else would have noticed, but after that night in the living room, there was a new kind of awareness hanging in the air. It showed up in the smallest things. The way she looked at me when I walked into the kitchen. The way I caught myself listening for her voice more than anyone else's. It was like we had stepped quietly into a secret that neither of us had spoken, but both of us understood. One afternoon, my friend had gone upstairs, leaving me alone with her in the dining room. She was setting the table, moving gracefully from one end to the other, while I leaned against the doorway, pretending not to watch her too closely. Are you just going to stand there, or will you help me? She teased, her tone light but her eyes carrying something warmer. I walked over quickly, taking the stack of plates from her hands. Our fingers brushed as I did, just for an instant, but the contact jolted through me. Her hand lingered a fraction of a second longer than it needed to, and when she finally let go, her eyes lifted to mine. There it was, that look again. The one that held too much meaning for something so simple. I tried to keep my voice steady. Sorry, I didn't want to drop them. She smiled softly. You're careful. That's rare. The words shouldn't have meant much, but the way she said them, low, deliberate, made me feel like she wasn't just talking about plates. Later that evening, as I was about to leave, she called after me from the kitchen. I stepped in, and she was standing near the counter, a dish towel in her hands. She turned, and for some reason, the space between us suddenly felt too small. You've been a big help around here, she said quietly, folding the towel. More than you realize. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, she reached out. Her hand touched my arm, a light, almost hesitant gesture, but it sent a shiver racing across my skin. Her thumb brushed once, slowly, as if testing whether she should pull away. She didn't. I froze, caught between wanting to step closer and fearing what that would mean. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. Her eyes locked with mine, steady, unblinking. For a moment, I thought she might say something that would change everything, but instead, she gave a small, almost secret smile. And then, as if nothing had happened, she withdrew her hand. Drive safe, she said softly. It was nothing. A touch on the arm. Barely more than a gesture of gratitude. But it wasn't nothing to me. It wasn't casual. Not anymore. Because the truth was, her hand could have rested on anyone's shoulder, anyone's arm. But it hadn't. It had been mine. And I couldn't pretend I didn't feel the weight of it. It was late one evening when the moment finally came. My friend had gone inside to grab something from his room, leaving me alone in the backyard. The night air was warm, carrying the faint smell of freshly cut grass. A string of lights hung across the patio, casting a soft, golden glow that felt almost unreal, like we were standing inside a memory. I heard the screen door slide open, and when I turned, she stepped out. She wasn't dressed up, just a simple blouse and cardigan, but under the lights, she seemed to carry a quiet radiance that made everything else fade into the background. "You're quiet tonight," she said gently, walking toward me. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just thinking, I guess." She tilted her head, smiling the way only she could, be warm, knowing, but tinged with something unspoken. "You think a lot, don't you?" Before I could answer, she stepped closer. Close enough that I caught the faint trace of her perfume, something floral and soft. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body in the cool night air. For a while, we just stood there. Neither of us said much, but the silence felt charged, alive. She looked at me then, not the casual glance of a friend's mom, but something deeper, sharper. Her eyes searched mine as if she was waiting for me to break the silence. But I didn't. I couldn't. So she did. She leaned in, just slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. "Don't tell him," she said, her words brushing against the night like a secret carried on the wind. Then her lips curved into the faintest, most dangerous smile. "You're my favorite secret." For a moment, the world stopped. My chest tightened, my pulse hammered in my ears. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Soft, deliberate, like a confession she had been holding back for too long. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Do you mean that?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes softened, almost vulnerable now. "More than I should," she admitted. The air between us was electric. I wanted to move closer, to close the impossible distance that still separated us, but I froze. I could feel the weight of what this meant, what it would change if I let myself reach for her. And yet, I couldn't ignore the way her gaze lingered on me, or how her hand hovered for a moment as though she wanted to touch me but held back. Before either of us could say more, the sound of footsteps came from inside. My friend's voice carried faintly through the open door. She stepped back quickly, her composure returning, but her eyes never left mine. "Remember," she whispered again, almost too quietly to hear. "Our secret." And then she turned toward the door, leaving me standing in the golden glow of the patio lights, heart racing, knowing nothing between us would ever be the same again. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. My friend had gone to bed early after a long day, leaving me alone downstairs. I was about to head out when I realized I'd forgotten my jacket. I turned back, moving through the dimly lit hallway, when I nearly collided with her. She had just stepped out of the kitchen, a soft glow from the lamp behind her outlining her figure. She wore a loose cardigan over a simple top, her hair falling gently over her shoulders. For a moment, neither of us spoke. It was like the silence between us carried more weight than any words could. "You scared me," she whispered with a small laugh, holding a hand to her chest. "Sorry," I said quickly, though my voice caught slightly. "I didn't mean to." But I didn't step back. Neither did she. The hallway was narrow, the walls close, forcing us into a closeness that felt anything but accidental. I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume, softer now, mixed with something warm, like home. My pulse picked up, each beat echoing through the stillness. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, steady. It wasn't the kind of look you gave a friend's son. It was deeper, more dangerous, a silent invitation wrapped in hesitation. "You should get going," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. I nodded slowly, but my feet didn't move. Instead, I found myself leaning just slightly closer, caught in her gravity. She didn't back away. Her lips parted, barely, her breath catching in the small space between us. The moment stretched, unbearably fragile. My heart pounded, my thoughts racing. I could feel the heat of her body, the soft brush of her breath against my cheek. All it would take was one step forward, one tilt of my head, and I'd be kissing her. And I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Her eyes flicked down to my lips, then back up again, and that single glance nearly undid me. The world outside didn't exist anymore. There was only her closeness, her warmth, the weight of everything we weren't saying. But then, at the very edge of surrender, I stopped. My chest rose and fell sharply as I pulled in a shaky breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if steadying herself, then opened them again, a quiet mixture of relief and disappointment shining there. "You're a good man," she whispered, her voice low, almost trembling. The words hit me harder than a kiss would have. I finally stepped back, breaking the spell, though every part of me ached to return to it. She gave a small, wistful smile, the kind that said more than words ever could. And just like that, the moment was gone. But the truth lingered in the silence we left behind. We both knew what almost happened. And we both knew it wasn't over. The next morning, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, though a strange weight still lingered between us. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and the soft hum of a coffee maker filled the silence. I walked in quietly, unsure of what I'd find. She was already there. Standing by the counter, mug in hand, her hair loosely tied back, she looked nothing like the woman who had almost kissed me in the hallway just hours before. And yet, she looked exactly the same. Graceful. Steady. Beautiful in a way that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. She noticed me and smiled, not the mischievous one from last night, not the charged one from the backyard, but something gentler. Softer. Almost tender. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm, as if she hadn't just been at the center of the storm in my chest. "Morning," I replied, shifting awkwardly before moving toward the counter. For a while, we didn't speak. She poured me a cup of coffee, sliding it across the counter without asking if I wanted one. The small act, so casual, so caring, tightened my throat in a way I couldn't explain. Finally, she broke the silence. "Last night," she paused, her eyes fixed on her coffee, as though choosing her words carefully. "It can't happen. You know that, right?" I nodded, my heart sinking even though I'd expected it. "I know." She looked up at me then, her eyes carrying both strength and something fragile, something that made me wonder if it was as hard for her to say as it was for me to hear. "But," she continued, her voice softening, "that doesn't mean it didn't matter." The words landed between us with a quiet finality. We weren't going to be reckless, we weren't going to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. But we weren't going to pretend it hadn't happened either. I managed a faint smile. I'll keep your secret, I said, half teasing, half serious. That made her laugh softly, shaking her head. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out, not to grab, not to hold, but to rest lightly on my shoulder. The warmth of her touch was fleeting, but it was enough. You already are my favorite secret, she whispered, her eyes locking with mine. There was no playful smirk this time, no forbidden thrill. Just honesty. I swallowed hard, memorizing every detail, the way the morning light curved around her, the sound of her voice, the softness of her hand before she pulled it back. And then it was over. Just like that. She turned back to her coffee, and I sipped mine in silence. The moment had closed, leaving behind only the quiet comfort of knowing something real had passed between us. When I left later that day, she didn't say anything more. She just gave me that smile, the same one she'd given me the very first day. Warm. Personal. Impossible to forget. And as I walked out the door, I realized something. Maybe some connections aren't meant to be lived out loud. Maybe some are meant to stay quiet, tucked away, carried like a secret. But that didn't make it any less real. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones no one else ever knows.